Okay. Welcome, everyone, to Visionary Leadership Call for Friday, September 12th, 2025. Today's theme is leadership in times of collective grief. Today, we're talking about how to hold coherence when the world is in pain. Now, this call occurs in the days immediately following some collective events, some events that happened, very high profile events that happened in the news. And I'm speaking to you this moment from the Western continent of the Northern Hemisphere, United States of America. And I'm very aware to what's happening nationally within my own country. But as I was sharing some inspirational messages of coherence and leadership across my communities this week, I had people reaching out to me from all over the planet saying, it's not just America. It's not limited to the United States. There are tremendous themes of upheaval and change globally. And that kind of opened my eyes a little bit because, sometimes I feel like it's easy for me as a leader of my community and, residing locally within a certain place, in a certain culture. Sometimes it's easy for me to get a little bit tunnel visioned and to really just see what's in front of my face. And yet this space of visionary leadership often asks us to step outside of what is right in front of us and to see something bigger and to sense into a collective field that is bigger than maybe what is immediately in our space. And so in these in these communities, we don't usually talk about current events. And today, to be clear, is not so much talking about a current event. It's talking about visionary leadership during times when the world really needs leaders to stand up and hold the field and model what it means to be resonant during times of collective stress and grief. So I invite you to take a moment now to arrive with me. I invite you to feel your feet on the ground. And let's deepen our breath. Letting our body settle into this moment, however it is. I invite you to join me in taking a couple of grounding breaths together. This is not a performance breath. This is a breath of presence. For a grounding breath, we inhale deeply through the nose and we exhale out loud with an audible sigh. Let's do that together. In through the nose. Let's do it again. Yes. And one more. Okay, we are here. We have arrived. And we are not here to bypass reality. We are here to bring consciousness into it. Welcome to everyone who has joined live on Discord. I see you all in the chat, and thank you for joining me for this conversation. So let's start by naming the field. Today's call sits inside a larger movement. The collective field is charged. It is tender, and it is reverberating. Many are reacting to the violent and sudden loss of Charlie Kirk, a figure of enormous political polarity, yes, but also of deep cultural impact. The field is full of grief, confusion, projection, conspiracy, silence, and shock. And it's important to point out that whether we aligned with him or not is not the point. Grief is not about agreement. It is about acknowledgement. We are not here to moralize, to analyze, or to deify. We are here to recognize that when a high signal node in the collective grid disappears suddenly and violently, the field wobbles. As leaders, especially as visionary leaders, we feel this wobble deeply. And we know that others are unconsciously looking to us for attunement. Because when the field is disoriented, coherent leaders become the tuning forks. Our core theme today is leadership in times of collective grief. When tragedy strikes, the old leadership model asks, how do we fix this? But visionary leadership asks a different question. Visionary leadership asks, how do we hold this? In the visionary leadership paradigm, coherence becomes the offering. Not explanation, not control, and not even immediate action. We as visionary leaders are not here to fix the chaos or even to try to explain it or make sense of it. We are here to become a tuning fork for coherence in the presence of the chaos. Grief collapses old constructs. And in the vacuum that opens, once these old constructs are collapsed by grief, there is always a choice. And please hear me on this. This is an important point. We are presented with a choice. Will we rush to fill the void with narrative? Will we rush to fill the void of the collapsed old constructs with narrative? Or will we anchor ourselves in the unknown and listen? Let's talk about the anatomy of grief leadership. There's 3 key ideas here, and the first is that grief opens portals. Grief disrupts the dream of control. Or perhaps a better word instead of dream would be the illusion of control. Grief disrupts that illusion. And that disruption reveals what is truly sacred. When someone dies suddenly, violently, or unexpectedly, the mind spins, but the soul becomes quiet. And we can either try to fill that quiet with noise, or we can enter into the quiet and honor that soul silence. So the key idea here is that leadership in this context means becoming a sacred witness to the rupture. It means becoming a sacred witness to the rupture, the disrupted illusion of control, the disrupted narrative, becoming a sacred witness to it, and not rushing to mend it. The second key idea here is that coherence is contagious. The human nervous system is a resonant field. When we choose to remain regulated, grounded, and present, we change the emotional weather around us. And this means that our choice to be calm does not make us passive. It means we are aligned with the deeper current of coherence. The resonant field that is seeded by our grounded presence. And the third key idea here, we can call the leadership of listening. When grief erupts in the collective, everyone wants and needs to be heard. But often few are willing to hear. This means that visionary leaders are asked to create listening space, to let others speak, feel, grieve, rage, and process. Our silence is not absence. It is architecture. We understand that the narrative doesn't need to be immediately rushed to be fixed, but rather we need to hold space for this rupture and allow the collective to process. Sometimes it's easiest to understand ideas like visionary leadership in times of mass grief or collective grief through case studies. And so I did some research today as this message was on my heart, mind, and soul, to find examples of leaders who modeled what it means to be a visionary leader in times of uncertainty. And so I have 3 examples. These are real. These are historical, documented examples. And they're aligned with the. I'm just giving a little bit of a content warning here. Obviously, we're going to be classy, but they are aligned with the themes of some of the things that happened this week. So this is just a little bit of a heads up here. So these are historical examples, case studies. So the first case study is of Jacinda Ardern and the Christchurch massacre response in 2019. So we're going to talk about the event. We're going to talk about the analysis of the leader's response. And then we're going to identify what the takeaways are for our leadership. Okay, so the event was on March 15th, 2019. A white supremacist gunman attacked 2 mosques in Christchurch, New Zealand, killing 51 Muslim worshippers and injuring many more. Jacinda Ardern is the head of the New Zealand government. And instead of reactive posturing or political distancing, Ardern entered the grief field without armor. She wore a black hijab. She bowed her head and wept with survivors. This was not performative. It was a demonstration of attuned resonance. And here's the visionary leadership principle. You cannot lead what you yourself will not feel. Ardern did not position herself above the people. She entered the rupture and held it with dignity and containment, not ego or defense. This is an example of regulated presence in a fractured field. Second thing that we can learn from Ardern's modeling of visionary leadership falls into the category of symbolic attunement and signaling to the field. Ardern's choice to wear a hijab was a nonverbal transmission of unity. She didn't speak first. She signaled first. This act immediately regulated the emotional field. Muslim citizens reported feeling seen, protected, and honored. The visionary leadership principle here is that before we speak, we must signal safety. Ardern's body language, tone, and dress code matched the frequency of the grief field. And this is a powerful example of leadership through symbolic coherence. The third principle here is what we could call narrative reclamation and the alchemy of language. In the days after the attack, Ardern consistently used the phrase, quote, "They are us." She did not center the killer. In fact, she refused to say his name. Instead, she centered the victims, their families, and the shared humanity of the nation. This was an act of narrative reframing that reclaimed the field from fear and tribalism. The visionary leadership principle demonstrated here is that words can either collapse timelines or open portals. She spoke language that unified identity. Instead of us versus them, she said, we. That verbal choice anchored a regenerative timeline amidst the risk of cultural fracture. Years later, Ardern remains globally recognized, not just as a prime minister, but as a case study in humane, visionary leadership. Her response redefined what political stewardship can look like when it combines emotional maturity with symbolic wisdom and structural alignment. And here's our key visionary leadership principle for this case study. The field remembers resonance, not just results. Ardern's legacy in that moment did not come from a strategy. It came from embodied authorship. She chose to embody the authorship of a future timeline where dignity, unity, and sacred response were possible. And here's our leadership takeaways. You don't need to have the answers to lead in times of grief. You just need to be real, attuned, and present. The symbolic realm, which includes dress, tone, and body language, is leadership in times of rupture. Narrative stewardship is sacred. The words you choose shape the timeline people walk into. Structural action, which basically just means anything that we do, is most effective when it emerges from emotional coherence. Now, this as a principle is always true. Anything we do will be most effective when it emerges from emotional coherence. And in times of rupture, the impact is exponential. People remember how you made them feel in crisis. And that energetic imprint becomes legacy. As I reflect on this final thought here, people remember how you made them feel in crisis. I think back to times in my life where I have experienced personal grief events. And I think about the people, many of them angels, who arrived in my field at that precise moment, and how more than anything they said, what I remember now years later is how they made me feel. There's a profound truth to this. The energetic imprint becomes legacy. And looking back, I feel so grateful for these certain people that I'm thinking of in this moment who were able to model emotional coherence and hold space for me to feel what I was feeling. Let's continue with a second case study. For this one, we are going to look through the visionary leadership lens at Barack Obama's leadership during the Charleston church shooting. And we're going to highlight the deeper dimensions of presence, timing, and energetic authorship. Okay, so to describe the event, on June 17th, 2015, a white supremacist gunman murdered 9 black worshipers during a Bible study at Emmanuel AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina, including the senior pastor, Reverend Clementa Pinckney. Obama was asked to speak at the funeral, specifically for Reverend Pinckney. And President Obama chose to step into the field of grief with stillness. And this is what happened. And I actually watched footage of this when I was doing the research, and this came up as an example. I watched the footage of this, and if you are in a place where you are open to receiving this type of subject matter, I encourage you to find it and watch this. He literally models it, the humanity of the moment, in a very beautiful and moving way. But I'll describe what happened for you now. Obama did not rush to speak. He waited. He grounded himself and entered the space with a steady presence. Not as a president asserting dominance, but as a man moved by the weight of the moment. The visionary leadership principle that President Obama demonstrated is this: wait until your signal is clean. Rather than responding from shock or strategy, Obama led with stillness before speech, letting grief metabolize in his own body before speaking into the field. During the eulogy for Reverend Pinckney, Obama paused mid-sentence. And then, unexpectedly, he began to sing. Amazing grace. The moment was unscripted. It was raw and profoundly symbolic. His voice was imperfect, and that was the point. It was not performance. It was participation in the collective grief ritual. In doing this, Obama demonstrated the visionary leadership principle that ritual begins where ego ends. This simple act of humanity broke through the intellectual layer of the speech and dropped the entire room and many watching around the world into the emotional and spiritual core of collective humanity. In doing this, Obama embodied frequency matching. He didn't just give a speech, he became the eulogy. His posture, rhythm, and even vocal tone moved in sync with the grieving Black community's spiritual cadence. And in doing this, he demonstrated the visionary leadership principle of this: match the soul frequency of the field you are stewarding. Match the soul frequency of the field you are stewarding. This goes beyond empathy and becomes embodied attunement. And this is an example of transcending the role of civic leader and truly embodying spiritual leader. And this was also an example of language and narrative alchemy and reclamation of the field. In that moment, Obama subtly reclaimed Christianity, not as a weapon, as the killer had perverted it to be, but as a source of resilience, of forgiveness, and revolutionary love. He honored the dead not just as victims, but as vessels of grace. Now, this is important because this is an example of the visionary leadership principle. We alchemize distortion when we steward the narrative. We alchemize distortion through our stewardship of the narrative. He didn't say, this is why we need to fix everything right now. I'm sure some political leaders may have been tempted to do that in a moment like that. But that's not the leadership that he modeled. Instead, he said, this is who we are when we remember who we really are. And this created a ripple effect and a legacy of resonance. Because that moment reverberated beyond Charleston. It became a collective memory, not just of Obama the man, but specifically of what it feels like when a leader is human first. And that single line of song did more to regulate the national field than any policy ever could. So here's the visionary leadership principle illustrated in this story. In times of grief, your nervous system is the leadership modality. People won't remember every word you say, but they will remember the emotional frequency you broadcast. So here's the takeaways for our leadership. 1, pause before you speak. Allow your energy to match the field you are entering. 2, allow ritual to emerge spontaneously. Don't control it, let it lead. 3, use the body, not just the voice, as your instrument of leadership. 4, reclaim sacred language from distortion by anchoring it in embodied truth. When I see that line, I think of embodying a very pure signal. A signal so pure it helps to clear the field of distortion. And finally, understand that your nervous system is public infrastructure in times of trauma. Now, I want to be clear here. I have not gone out in public. I haven't gone out into the public square this week since these events. And yet, even without being in a public space, our nervous system is still public infrastructure. So the field that we choose to radiate when we are visionary leaders and we choose to embody coherence, and we will do this together. I have an embodiment practice coming up in just a few moments. The field that we choose to embody radiates outward and can be felt. I mean, you could even say it's not limited to distance. I mean, really, you are the field, right? Let's not forget that. You literally are the field. Your consciousness is the field. So when you choose to embody resonance, your nervous system is public infrastructure. It's all the time, and especially in times of trauma. And this allows others to borrow your coherence. Okay, one more case study, and then we will move into the embodiment practice, and we will radiate together. Resonance. All right, case study 3, the mothers of Plaza de Mayo. Argentina's long vigil for the disappeared. Here's the context. from 1976 to 1983. During Argentina's brutal military dictatorship, an estimated 30,000 people were forcibly disappeared. This included activists, students, workers, many of whom were never heard from again, presumed to be executed in secret. Their families were left with no answers. And then the mothers gathered. These were not trained activists. They were not officials. And they were not political figures. They were mothers, grandmothers, and citizens. Their leadership did not emerge from credentials. It emerged from grief, alchemized into sacred responsibility. And this group, this collective, began to gather every Thursday in front of the presidential palace. And they began to demonstrate a key visionary leadership principle, and it is this: leadership is not granted. Leadership is not something that is given by another. Leadership is claimed through coherence. These people did not ask permission to lead. They simply showed up again and again and again. And in doing this, they demonstrated leadership through presence, not power. They wore simple white scarves on their heads, embroidered with the names of their missing children. They carried black and white photographs of faces lost to silence. And they walked slowly in circles every Thursday around the Plaza de Mayo in front of the presidential palace. Their stillness became more powerful than any military parade. And as they did this, they were conducting what we would call symbolic fieldcraft. Their white scarves and photos. And they demonstrated the visionary leadership principle that ritualized visibility creates coherent disruption. Ritualized visibility creates coherent disruption. These mothers became living sigils. Their bodies, their presence, their symbols, broadcasting a steady pulse of presence that refused to forget. And as they did this, they modeled slow coherence as a sacred strategy. The dictatorship tried to ignore them at first, and then to intimidate them, and finally to slander them. But the mothers kept showing up. They gave no speeches. There was no political theater, just presence. They stood in the void where their children used to be and refused to collapse. In doing this, they demonstrated the visionary leadership principle that slowness is not weakness. Slowness is stability over time. They did not ride the wave of media cycles. They became the steady drumbeat that kept memory alive. Even when it was clear that many of their children would never return, the mothers did not stop. Their leadership transcended goal-oriented activism. They became the moral infrastructure of a nation in recovery. And in doing this, they demonstrated the leadership principle that sometimes your role is not to win, it is to remember. And in doing so, they kept Argentina tethered to its soul. Decades later, these mothers are global symbols of peaceful resistance, sacred grief, and spiritual leadership through simplicity. Their white scarves are now icons of justice, not because of power, but because of unbroken signal. And in doing this, they illustrated the visionary leadership principle. The longer the signal is sustained, the deeper the encoding. The longer the signal is sustained, the deeper the encoding. They turned a plaza into a sacred site. They turned motherhood into a form of public authorship. Here's our takeaways from this case study of the mothers of Plaza de Mayo. You do not need a microphone to lead. Your feet showing up can be enough. Symbols can carry coherence when language is suppressed. The ritual repetition of presence creates timelines of memory and justice. Not all grief leads to collapse. Some grief leads to civic mythogenesis. Civic mythogenesis. The birthing of a new myth. When injustice silences truth, grief becomes the voice that cannot be denied. And even today, their leadership continues to echo, and this is what it says. You are not here to rush the healing. You are here to keep the light on until others remember their way back. The mothers did not organize a revolution. Instead, they became a resonance. Their frequency altered the trajectory of a nation, not by toppling the system, but by outlasting it in love. I invite you all now to join me in a guided ritual of holding the field. We're going to move from theory and we're going to do field work now together. If it is safe for you to do so, I invite you to close your eyes. Place one hand on your heart, one on your belly. Let your breath deepen and your shoulders drop. Invite you to visualize the collective field, expanding beyond borders of nations, globally, to see the entire collective field of Earth. Imagine it as a glowing, flickering sphere. Some areas bright, some dark, some pulsing with pain. Now feel your own body become a pillar of steady light in that flickering field. Each breath you take transmits resonance into the collective. Each exhale becomes a transmission of calm. I invite you to whisper silently or aloud, I hold the field. I anchor the real. I remain coherent in the presence of rupture. I will repeat this. I hold the field. I anchor the real. I remain coherent in the presence of rupture. And let this be our offering. As we move to wrap up this space, I offer you 3 integration practices that you can return to in any moment of collective grief or rupture. I'll go through each of them now. And I'll also post them in the chat in case you would like to save them for reference. The first is field scan and breath regulation. At the start of each day, scan your body and ask, what am I holding that is not mine? And then use your breath to release what is not yours to carry. When I did this today, I was imagining that the exhale was releasing or expelling any energy that is not mine to carry. And I saw it leaving through my lips, leaving out of my lungs, out of my body, breathing that energy out, releasing it, letting it go. What am I holding that is not mine? Whatever it is, choose to release it using the breath. The second integration practice is to use symbolic stillness. Your non-reaction can be a message. Your silence becomes a sanctuary. You can study the field without needing to speak. And the third is a coherence anchoring phrase. And this is something you can say to yourself, usually best when paired with a physiological anchoring. So one hand over the heart, one hand over the belly, to steady the nervous system. And then the line that you say is this: I am a steady presence in an unsteady world. I am a steady presence in an unsteady world. And I offer this final declaration. Hand over the heart, other hand over the belly. I will speak these words over our group and over the collective. I do not bypass pain. I breathe with it. I do not lead to dominate. I lead to dignify. I become the eye of the storm, not to control the storm, but to remember the calm. I offer my coherence into the grid. I am a remembering presence in a forgetting world. I invite you to breathe, let it land. We're going to move into transition here. And as we do, I invite you to share either in your journal or in the chat. I have two prompts. First is one word to name the energy you're holding now. One word to name the energy you're holding now. Drop it in the chat. hope, stillness, serenity, love. Resilience. Relief. Peace. Beautiful. Thank you, my fellow visionary leaders, for walking the path of visionary leadership. You are needed, you are felt, and you are not alone.